Everyone in Bryer County laughed when Caleb Rusk paid $12 for 37 acres of limestone trash. The bank president called it the dumbest purchase ever made by a grown man. 8 months later, the laughing stopped. Because Caleb had not bought land, he had bought the lid. The county courthouse smelled like floor wax, wet coats, and old coffee. The morning Caleb Rusk walked into the tax auction with $12 in his pocket. Not 1,200, not 12,000, 12. A 5 6 and 4 quarters wrapped in a grocery receipt. He was 64 years old, with a bad right hip, cracked work boots, and hands permanently stained by machine grease and red clay. 2 years earlier, he had owned 80 acres of bottomland outside Copper Falls. His father had raised cattle on it. His grandfather had pulled stumps out of it with a mule team. Then came 3 dry seasons, 2 bad loans, and 1 smiling banker named Victor Harlan. Victor owned Bryer County Trust, half the soybean elevators, 3 local judges by campaign donation, and the kind of smile that made a foreclosure notice feel like a handshake. He was sitting in the front row that morning in a charcoal suit, buying distressed farms the way other men bought lunch. The auctioneer, Dale Murrow, slapped his papers against the podium. Next parcel. County Lot 19B, the Cutbank Tract. A sound moved through the room, not interest, disgust. The Cutbank Tract was a joke with a property line. 37 acres of fractured limestone, scrub cedar, clay gullies, and poison sumac sitting behind an abandoned quarry road. It flooded in spring, cracked open in summer, and had not produced anything useful since the old lime company collapsed in 1931. Dale cleared his throat. Opening bid $500. Silence. The ceiling fan clicked over 30 embarrassed faces. 200? Still nothing. Victor Harlan leaned back and laughed through his nose. Dale, put that dirt out of its misery. You could bury a dead mule out there and the mule would complain. People laughed. Dale lifted his gavel. Seeing no bids, $12. The voice came from the back wall. Every head turned. Caleb Rusk stood beside a bulletin board covered in church suppers and missing dogs. His face was calm, but the folded bills in his hand trembled. For one quiet second, nobody understood. Then the room exploded. A woman near the aisle covered her mouth. A man from the feed store slapped his knee. Victor Harlan stood up slowly, smiling as if God had handed him entertainment. Caleb, Victor said, loud enough for the whole room, I already took your farm. Are you buying a place to hide your pride now? More laughter. Caleb did not look at him. He looked at the auctioneer. The notice says no reserve. County is required to accept the highest bid if the parcel receives one. Dale glanced at the clerk. The clerk checked the folder, swallowed, and nodded. Dale looked miserable. I have $12. Do I hear 13? That made them laugh harder. Give it to him, someone shouted. Let him be king of the rocks. Dale tapped the gavel fast, like he wanted to erase the moment. Sold. $12 to Caleb Rusk. Caleb walked down the aisle while the town snickered at his back. He placed the money on the clerk's desk, slid the quarters forward with 2 fingers, and signed his name on the deed. Victor stepped close enough that Caleb could smell the mint on his breath. What are you going to grow out there, old man? Caleb folded the deed once and put it inside his coat. I already found what I wanted. Victor's smile thinned, but he let Caleb walk out, because nobody in Bryer County believed a broke mechanic could know something the bank did not. 1 week earlier, Caleb had been walking the Cutbank Ridge to set a coyote snare for a neighbor. A storm had washed out part of a cedar thicket near the old quarry shelf, exposing a strip of ground the color of dried blood. Caleb noticed something strange, not treasure, not a door, a line, a perfect curved line cutting through the mud. Nature makes circles, but not like that. Not with 7 square iron bolt heads spaced so evenly they looked measured by a surveyor. Caleb knelt, pulled away a mat of roots, and tapped the exposed metal with his pocket knife. The sound was deep, not fence wire, not scrap tin. Something heavy was under the hill. He covered it back up with brush before anyone could see it. Then he went to the auction. Now, with the deed in his coat and the laughter still ringing in his ears, Caleb drove his battered white pickup out past the last mailbox in Copper Falls. The quarry road was almost gone, 2 muddy ruts swallowed by grass and cedar shadow. Branches scraped both sides of the truck, the windshield shook. The old engine coughed like it wanted to quit. He parked where the road gave up, lifted a shovel, a pick mattock, a wire brush, and a canteen from the bed, then started up the slope on foot. The cutbank tract looked worse when it belonged to him. Rock shelves broke through the soil like old bones. Rainwater had carved trenches deep enough to snap an ankle. Cedar limbs crowded low and mean, catching his shirt, scraping his ears, pulling at him like the land itself did not want to be searched. But Caleb kept climbing. After 20 minutes he reached the thicket. The storm washout was still there. He got down on one knee and scraped away the mud. There it was, the curved iron line. He widened the patch. More bolt heads appeared. Then more. The arc kept going beneath the roots, smooth and deliberate, too wide to be a barrel, too thick to be farm equipment. Caleb stood, breathing hard. The shape was not a ring. It was the top edge of something buried, something enormous. For 6 hours he cut cedar branches, pulled roots, and shoveled clay until his shoulders burned. His hips screamed every time he bent. His palms blistered under old gloves. At one point he sat back against a rock, dizzy from heat, and almost laughed at himself. A 64-year-old man with no farm, no savings, and $12 less than yesterday, digging alone on a hill everybody else knew was worthless. Then his shovel hit it. The impact shot up the handle and into his wrists. Caleb froze. He scraped with the blade, then dropped to his knees and dug by hand. Red clay came away in hard clumps. A flat plate of steel emerged beneath it, rusted dark brown, riveted and cold even under the afternoon sun. He brushed it clean. Stamped into the metal, almost eaten by rust, were 3 letters and a date. BCL 1928. Briar County lime, Caleb whispered. What did you hide? He moved 5 feet downhill and dug again. Steel, 10 feet left. Steel, the entire rise beneath the cedar thicket was not a hill, it was a buried roof. For the next 4 days, Caleb told nobody. He left before dawn. He came back after dark. In town, he let them laugh. He let Victor Harlan smirk at him through the diner window. He let people ask if his new rock farm needed watering. By the 4th evening, a thunderstorm rolled over the ridge, turning the sky green and the clay slick as grease. That was when Caleb found the entrance. It sat on the north face of the rise, buried under a slope of roots and broken limestone. Not a wooden door, not a mine shaft. A vertical steel bulkhead with a recessed wheel in the center. The wheel was nearly 3 feet wide. The kind of wheel used on ships, bank vaults, and places built to keep men out. Caleb wrapped both hands around it and pulled. Nothing. He planted one boot against the frame and pulled until pain flashed white behind his eyes. The wheel did not move. Rainwater ran down his neck. Mud filled the trench around his boots. The buried door stared back at him like it had been waiting longer than he had been alive. He knew then he could not open it alone. There was only one person in Briar County he trusted with a secret that big. Mac Bell ran Bell's wrecker service in a cinder-block garage behind the old bowling alley. He was 58, 6'4", built like an engine hoist, and smelled permanently of diesel, tobacco, and burnt brake pads. When Caleb lost his farm, Mac had given him a room above the shop and never once called it charity. At 10:30 that night, Caleb hammered on the garage door. Mac rolled it up halfway, holding a wrench the size of a fireplace poker. "Caleb, you look like the creek spit you out." Caleb stood in the rain, soaked to the skin. "I need your generator, your cutting torch, your big winch, and every work light you own." Mac looked past him into the storm. "Body or treasure?" "I don't know." That wiped the sleep from Mac's face. Caleb stepped closer. "And you can't tell anybody? Not your cousins, not your poker table. Nobody." Mac stared at him for a long second, then he opened the door all the way. At midnight, Mac's tow truck crawled up the quarry road with its headlights off, guided by a hand spotlight pointed low at the mud. They worked under a black tarp stretched between cedar trunks to keep the torch glow hidden from the highway. When Mac saw the bulkhead, he stopped chewing his toothpick. "That ain't mining scrap. What is it?" Mac put one hand on the steel and felt along the seam. "Somebody built a freight vault under your hill." "Who?" "The kind of people who had money, secrets, and no interest in permits." Mac fired the torch. Blue flame opened the night. For 2 hours he cut through hinges as thick as fence posts. Sparks fell into the mud and died with tiny hisses. Rain ticked on the tarp. Caleb stood behind him, holding a flashlight, unable to stop imagining what might be on the other side. Gold, bones, a collapsed tunnel, a bomb. At 2 a.m, Mac killed the torch and hooked the winch cable through the steel wheel. "Stand clear." The tow truck engine growled. The cable tightened. Nothing moved. Then the buried locking pins snapped with a sound like rifle shots. The door tore free and fell forward into the mud with a thud that shook the slope. Cold air poured out, not damp cave air, dry, sealed, preserved air, and underneath it came a smell Caleb had not expected. Old oak, dust, sweet grain. Mac lifted a work light and pointed it into the dark. The beam opened a room under the hill. Concrete walls, steel roof ribs, ceramic air pipes running into the limestone, wooden racks standing in rows so long the light could not reach the far end. On the nearest rack sat oak barrels, gray with dust. Stamped on the face of the first barrel, Copper Crown Medicinal Rye, bottled in bond, 1924. Caleb forgot how to breathe. Mac whispered, "Oh, Lord!" They stepped inside. The chamber was huge, almost the size of a basketball court, built beneath the old quarry shelf, and hidden so perfectly that 80 years of storms had only buried it deeper. The temperature dropped the farther they walked. Their breath showed faintly in the beam. Caleb touched one barrel. Mac rapped it with his knuckles. Hollow. He frowned and tried another. Hollow. Caleb's stomach dropped. The rye's gone. Mac pulled a bung loose. A black syrupy bead slid down the wood and fell to the floor. 80 years in oak, Mac said softly. It breathed itself empty. For one crushing minute, the greatest discovery of Caleb's life looked like a warehouse of dead barrels. Then Mac moved his light behind the rack. "Caleb," his voice changed. Caleb came around the end of the row. The barrels were a wall. Behind them were crates. Hundreds of wooden crates. Thousands, maybe. Stacked floor to ceiling, each stamped with old federal medical seals and shipping numbers from 1924. Mac jammed a crowbar under one lid and pried. The crate cracked open. Inside, packed in dry straw, were 12 glass bottles. Each bottle was full. Each label was clean. Each cork was buried under wax and revenue paper. The whiskey had not aged in wood. It had been sealed in glass. Caleb lifted one bottle and the amber liquid caught the work light like fire. Mac's voice went hoarse. "Collectors pay thousands for one real bottle from Prohibition." He swept the light across the crates. "Caleb, there might be 3,000 bottles in here." Caleb leaned one hand against the rack. The world tilted. Then the light drifted past the crates and hit canvas. 5 shapes sat in the center of the vault under heavy tarps. Long hoods, high fenders, spare tires mounted like shields. Mac pulled the first tarp away. Dust rolled off a black and burgundy 1930 Stutz Roadster with armor glass 2 inches thick. The second tarp revealed a Packard sedan with reinforced doors. The third, an REO Speedwagon with false flooring and hidden side compartments. The fourth, a long Lincoln touring car whose trunk held canvas-wrapped Thompson guns and boxes of ammunition. And under the last tarp sat the crown jewel, a silver 1931 Duesenberg Model J, plated underneath like a bank truck, its leather still intact in the dry air. Mac stood with both hands on his head. "Caleb, this was not a storage room." Caleb looked at the cars, the whiskey, the hidden guns, and the crates marked with federal seals. "What was it?" A Prohibition relay vault. Bootleggers ran from Chicago to the Gulf. They hid loads in places like this when the roads got hot. Mac turned slowly, trying to take in the room. And you bought it for $12. That was when they heard the tires, a slow crunch above them. Not Mac's truck, something expensive moving over wet gravel. They killed the lights and climbed out into the gray edge of dawn. Victor Harlan's black Range Rover sat at the top of the slope. Victor stepped out in polished shoes, looked down at the ripped-open steel door, and stopped smiling. For once, he said nothing. Caleb climbed the muddy bank with Mac behind him. "You're trespassing, Victor." Victor looked from the vault door to the tow truck, then into the black mouth of the chamber. His eyes sharpened. Caleb could almost see the numbers adding themselves. "What did you find?" "Private property." Victor laughed once. "Your property?" Caleb held up the deed. Victor's face relaxed into something colder than anger. "Oh, Caleb, you really should have let a lawyer read that before you played treasure hunter." Mac stepped forward. "Say what you came to say." Victor took a folded document from inside his coat. "My holding company owns the severed quarry and mineral rights under this tract, acquired when Bryer County Trust absorbed the old lime company liens." Caleb felt the first needle of fear. Victor pointed at the vault. "Anything under 8 feet is part of my subsurface estate. You bought brush, I own what matters." "Mineral rights cover minerals," Caleb said. Victor smiled. "And local judges decide what words mean." He lifted his phone. "Sheriff Laney, this is Victor. I need you at the Cutbank tract. 2 men are illegally excavating corporate property." 12 minutes later, 2 sheriff cruisers rolled up. Sheriff Roy Laney got out slowly, one hand resting near his belt, eyes avoiding Caleb's face. "Caleb, step away from the opening. You know this is wrong. I know there's a dispute." "There's no dispute. I own the deed." Victor spoke smoothly. "He owns surface access. My corporation owns the subsurface chamber. Until a judge sorts it out, this site needs to be secured." Laney pulled yellow tape from his trunk. Caleb looked past him at the vault, at the crates, at the cars, at the one chance in his life to stand taller than the men who had ground him down. Mac grabbed his shoulder. "Not here," Mac whispered. "He wants you arrested." Caleb's jaw shook, but he stepped back. Victor watched them load the torch, generator, and lights into Mac's tow truck. When Caleb climbed into the passenger seat, Victor leaned close to the window. "Some men find treasure," he said. "Smart men keep it." Mac drove away without speaking for almost a mile. Then he said, "My sister Nora is still in Little Rock." "The lawyer?" "The dangerous one." Nora Bell arrived before noon the next day in a blue sedan, with a cracked windshield and a leather briefcase full of papers. She was 52, sharp-eyed, and had the exhausted confidence of someone who had spent 25 years beating rich men with footnotes. She did not waste time. Mac's garage office smelled like motor oil and burnt coffee as Nora spread deeds, quarry maps, federal statutes, and photocopied charters across the desk. "Victor is bluffing," she said. Caleb leaned forward. "He has the mineral rights." "He has quarry rights," Nora corrected. "The 1910 severance deed grants limestone, shale, coal, and commercial aggregate. It does not grant buildings. It does not grant abandoned vehicles. It does not grant sealed bottled liquor. It does not grant personal property hidden by third parties." Mac pointed at the map. "So the vault is Caleb's. Under ordinary property law, yes. As surface owner, he has the strongest claim to abandoned non-mineral property embedded in the land. But Victor knows the county courthouse better than we do. He will get a friendly order to classify the chamber as a quarry obstruction." Caleb closed his eyes. "So he wins." Nora's smile was thin. "No, he wins locally." She pulled out a new filing stamped for federal court. "That vault contains bonded medicinal alcohol, antique revenue seals, automatic weapons, and historically significant interstate trafficking evidence. Local politics do not control federal contraband or federal preservation orders." Caleb looked up. "What does that mean?" It means I filed an emergency preservation petition. ATF and a federal marshal are already looped in. At 7 tomorrow morning, Victor Harlan will be served with an injunction freezing every object in that vault. Mac grinned. Caleb did not. Tomorrow morning. Nora's face hardened. Yes, and Victor's attorneys will see the filing tonight. Silence filled the garage. Mac said it first. He'll move it. Nora nodded. Of course he will. He cannot win the law, so he will try to move the facts. Caleb looked at the maps. If those crates leave that land, he'll hide them in one of his warehouses. And claim the vault was empty, Nora said, unless someone records him in the act. Mac was already reaching for a duffel bag. Caleb stared at him. No. Mac opened a drawer and dropped bolt cutters, tow chains, and a handheld camera into the bag. Caleb, he laughed while he took your farm. This is federal now. Good, Mac said. Then let's make sure the feds have something worth arresting. At 3:40 in the morning, Caleb and Mac crawled through wet cedar scrub above the cut bank vault while diesel engines shook the hollow below. Victor had not waited. Floodlights burned white against the limestone. 2 flatbed trucks sat nose out near the excavation. A tract loader idled in the mud. Private security men moved fast, carrying crates from the vault and stacking them under black tarps. Victor stood beside the Range Rover in a hunting coat, shouting into the noise. Move the liquor first, the cars if we have time. I want this hill empty before daylight. Caleb's hand tightened around the camera. He recorded Victor's face, the license plates, the crates, the men, the open vault, every second of it. Then Mac touched Caleb's arm and pointed. The loader cable had been hooked to the Duesenberg. The car was being dragged up steel ramps, inch by inch, its armored tires rolling for the first time in nearly a century. Mac whispered, I can stop the machine. Caleb shook his head. There are 6 men down there, and 1 slope made of wet clay. Before Caleb could answer, Mac disappeared into the dark. Caleb slid along the ridge toward the flatbed loaded with crates. Mud soaked through his coat. Thorns cut his cheek. He kept the camera high enough to see, low enough not to catch the floodlight. The first sabotage came as a scream of metal. The loader lurched sideways. Its right track peeled off the drive wheel and slapped into the mud like a dead snake. The cable went slack. The Duesenberg rolled backward down the ramp and bumped hard against the vault wall. Men shouted. Victor spun around. What happened? The operator jumped down. Track's gone. Fix it. In this mud? Not before sunrise. Victor looked at his watch. Panic showed through the polish. Leave the cars. Take the whiskey. Move. The flatbed engine roared. The driver shifted. The rear wheels spun, throwing clay 10 feet into the air. The truck did not move. Victor ran to the back with a flashlight. A steel tow chain was wrapped around the rear axle. The other end disappeared around the trunk of a huge sycamore tree. Mac had chained the treasure to the county itself. Victor screamed something Caleb could not hear over the engine. Then another sound rose through the hollow. Not county sirens. Deeper, faster. 3 black SUVs tore up the quarry road and boxed in the trucks. Doors opened. Men in tactical vests stepped out with rifles raised. Federal agents. Hands where we can see them. The valley froze. Nora Bell stepped out behind the lead marshal in a dark coat, holding a folder against her chest like a weapon. Victor's face went white. Supervisory Marshal Grant Kessler walked straight toward him. Victor Harlan, you are ordered to step away from the vehicles. Victor lifted both hands, but his mouth kept working. This is private property. I am securing assets under a subsurface claim. Nora opened the folder. Actually, you're removing federally protected evidence after notice of preservation. I had no notice. Caleb stepped from behind the flatbed, still recording. You do now. Victor turned and saw him. For the first time, Caleb saw fear in the banker's eyes. Nora nodded toward Caleb's camera. He has you on video ordering the cargo moved before sunrise. He has your men loading bonded liquor. He has your loader hooked to a registered antique vehicle. And Victor, she paused. Did anyone tell you about the unregistered Thompson guns in the Lincoln? Victor stopped breathing. The security men raised their hands higher. Marshal Kessler spoke once. Cuff 'em, Victor snapped. Caleb, wait, listen, I'll write you a check. 2 million. Right now, no lawyers, no court, we split it. Caleb walked through the mud until he stood a few feet away. This was the man who had taken his farm, laughed at his poverty, and tried to steal the one thing he had found with his own hands. Victor swallowed. 5 million. Caleb looked at the chained flatbed, the broken loader, the federal agents, the open vault, and the first pale line of morning over the ridge. Then he looked back at Victor. The price was $12, and I already paid it. The cuffs closed. By sunrise, Sheriff Laney arrived furious and left without his badge. Federal agents sealed the vault properly. ATF removed the weapons. Preservation officers cataloged the vehicles, the crates, the labels, the revenue stamps, the ledgers, the ceramic ventilation pipes, and the old Briar County lime construction marks on the steel roof. The room under Caleb's Hill became national news in 48 hours. They called it the Cutbank Vault. Reporters stood at the quarry road and told the country how a bankrupt mechanic had bought condemned land for $12 and uncovered the largest intact Prohibition relay cache ever found in the region. Victor Harlan's lawyers tried to fight. For 6 months they filed motions, objections, emergency claims, and threats. But the deeper the court looked, the worse it got for Victor. His bank records opened first, then his foreclosure files, then his private security invoices. Then the judges who had taken campaign money from his companies started remembering things under oath. By winter, Victor was not fighting for the vault anymore. He was fighting to stay out of prison. He failed. The federal judge confirmed what Nora had argued from the beginning. The quarry rights covered rock, not history. The vault was an abandoned man-made fixture attached to the surface estate. The bonded bottles, vehicles, and non-weapon contents belonged to Caleb Rusk. The guns went to federal custody. The rest changed his life. The Duesenberg alone sold for more than $7 million after restoration and authentication. The armored Stutz, the Packard, the REO Speedwagon, and the Lincoln brought in millions more. The sealed Copper Crown bottles were split between collectors, museums, and a historical beverage trust that paid enough to make Nora whistle in open court. After taxes, legal fees, restoration, and federal compliance costs, Caleb Rusk received more money than he had ever imagined touching. He did not move to Miami. He did not buy a yacht. His first purchase was the old Rusk farm, bought back from the liquidation of Victor Harlan's bank. His second was a new roof for Mac's garage. His third was a partnership agreement. Bell and Rusk Historic Motors opened in an abandoned feed warehouse by the railroad tracks, restoring old machines with the care of men who knew what steel could remember. Nora Bell used her fee to launch a property defense clinic for families losing land to predatory lending. And the Cutbank tract? After the vault was emptied and documented, Caleb kept it. He fenced the ridge, cleared a walking path, and left the old steel bulkhead standing under a shelter at the edge of the cedar thicket. School buses came sometimes. So did history professors. So did men who had laughed at him in the courthouse and now could not meet his eye. Caleb never made speeches. He would point at the rusted wheel and say, "Most people saw a hill." Then he would point at the courthouse receipt framed beside it. $12. 4 quarters, still taped to the paper. On a quiet Sunday 1 year after the auction, Mac joined him on the porch of the reclaimed farmhouse. The fields were green again. Rain moved across the far ridge in silver sheets. 2 cold beers sweated on the rail between them. Mac looked out over the pasture. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't bid?" Caleb smiled. "Somebody else would have owned the dirt, but not the lid." Caleb nodded. "That's the thing about buried doors. They don't open for the people laughing at them." Inside the house, above the fireplace, Caleb kept no photograph of the $1 million cars. No auction paddle, no newspaper cover. Just the deed to 37 worthless acres, and beside it, under glass, a rusted square bolt head from the first curved line he found in the mud. A reminder that the whole town had laughed at a fool with $12. But the fool was the only man who heard the ground ring hollow.
The heavy disc was still attached from repairing washouts. The white tractor sat cold. There was no time for a perfect start, no time to warm the oil, no time to do anything but pray the line still held enough heat from the day. She hit the key. The engine groaned. Again. It coughed, bucked, and threw smoke against the shed roof. "Come on," Mara whispered. "Come on." The engine caught. She slammed it into gear and drove straight toward the fire. The ditch was a wall of flame by the time she reached the south field. Heat punched through the cab glass. Embers skidded across the hood. The fire moved faster than a person could run. Mara dropped the disc into her own corn. The blades bit deep. The tractor screamed under the load, grinding forward as stalks snapped, roots tore, and perfect crop disappeared under churned black soil. A firebreak is an ugly kind of salvation. It asks you to destroy a strip of what you love so the rest can live. Mara drove parallel to the flames, 30 yards ahead of them, cutting a raw wound across the field. The disc threw dirt over dry leaves. Corn shattered under the tires. Smoke swallowed the headlights. The right side of the hood blistered from heat. She did not stop, not when the fire jumped the ditch. Not when sparks hit the windshield. Not when the cab filled with smoke so thick her eyes streamed. She drove until the firebreak ran from the county road to the old creek cut, a black strip of exposed earth, wide enough to starve the flames. Then she pulled the tractor clear and watched. The fire reached the break. It licked at the dirt. It searched. It found nothing. The wall collapsed into scattered tongues, then into glowing patches, then into smoke. When the volunteer trucks arrived, the fire was already beaten. Mara had lost 31 acres. She had saved the rest. At sunrise, she walked the ditch with Sheriff Lena Ortiz. The grass was black. The fence post smoked. Near the shoulder, half melted into the gravel, lay a red fuel can with a torn paper label still stuck to one side. Braddock AG Holdings. Sheriff Ortiz crouched. Mara did not say anything. She had learned, finally, that the loudest thing in a room is often proof. At 7 the next morning, Mara walked into the county co-op. The place was full. Harvest season made the co-op the courthouse, stock exchange, and gossip church of the Panhandle. Farmers stood by the coffee counter. Truckers waited for scale tickets. Ellis Braddock sat at the long table under the seed corn calendar, clean hat on the chair beside him. Clay Dern stood behind him, arms crossed. Mara had not washed the soot from her face. The room quieted before the door finished closing. Ellis looked up with practiced concern. "Mara," he said, "heard you had trouble out there. Shame about that fire." She walked to his table and set a clear evidence bag in front of him. Inside was the melted red fuel can. The Braddock label faced up. Clay's face went slack. Ellis did not look at him. That was his first mistake. "Plenty of people have my cans," Ellis said. "You found trash after a fire and dragged it here like theater." Mara nodded. "You're right, a can is not enough." The room held its breath. Mara leaned closer. "But Clay bought accelerant at Rusk Hardware at Sauzo Bonmihai PM on a company card. Sheriff Ortiz pulled the receipt this morning. She also pulled tire casts from the ditch. And the co-op scale camera caught your flatbed heading south at Bezo Muichin, with that can strapped behind the cab." Clay moved first. Just a half step back, enough. Ellis saw it and knew everyone else had too. The front door opened. Sheriff Ortiz entered with 2 deputies. "Ellis Braddock," she said. "Clay Dern, we need you outside." Ellis stood slowly, the blood rising dark in his neck. "You have no idea what you've started," he said to Mara. Mara looked at the men who had laughed at the Friar tractor, the men who had slowed by her fields waiting for failure, the men who now would not meet Ellis's eyes. "Yes," she said, "I do." The harvest began 4 days later. Mara did not have a new combine. She had a 1994 Gleaner bought cheap from an estate patched by Rafe, and converted with the same ugly genius that powered everything else at Flintline. It started on diesel, it ran on canola, and when the header entered the first rows, the grain tank filled with corn so heavy and dry that Rafe slapped the window like a man watching a horse win by 10 lengths. 248, he shouted, watching the yield monitor. "Mara, do you see that?" She saw it. She saw the number, the rows, the dust, the golden stream of corn pouring into the tank. But she also saw Jonah's handwriting. Cut the leash first. For 18 days, Flintline ran almost without stopping. The combine crossed the fields on fuel grown from the previous year's unwanted seed. The trucks rolled to the elevator. The scale tickets stacked in a metal box on the passenger seat. The co-op manager stopped making jokes and started meeting Mara at the probe with both hands out. The final harvest settlement came the first week of November after repairs, trucking, seed, taxes, labor, and every hidden cost the year could throw at her. Mara had enough. Enough to pay the mortgage down to the last cent. Enough to settle Jonah's medical bills. Enough to buy a proper continuous cold press, filters, spare mechanical pumps, and 2 more old tractors no bank could remotely disable with a clause or a missed payment. On a cold Monday morning, Mara returned to Platte Valley Bank. Gordon Vale came out of his office smiling so hard it looked painful. "Mara, I've been hoping we could talk. Your harvest numbers are remarkable. We can structure a premium operating line next season. Very favorable terms." Mara placed a cashier's check on the counter. "This pays the farm mortgage, the tax escrow, and the remaining medical balance." Gordon looked at the check, then at her. "I see. Close the operating account. Mara, with your new position, Platte Valley would be proud to remain. You were proud to sell me when I was grieving." The lobby went still. Gordon's smile vanished. Mara took the receipt from the teller and folded it into Jonah's notebook. Flintline does not borrow from people who mistake pressure for wisdom. By winter, the machine shed no longer looked like a widow trying to survive. It looked like a small rebellion with walls. Rows of filtered canola oil sat in clean totes. The new press hummed in its own insulated room. Old tractors from estate sales waited with rebuilt pumps and fresh hoses. A chalkboard near the door listed oil temperature ranges, purge times, filter changes, and which engines could handle vegetable oil without destroying themselves. At first, 1 neighbor came, then 3, then a dozen. Men who had laughed from truck windows stood awkwardly near the press, caps in their hands, watching Mara explain the system Jonah had designed and she had proven under fire. She did not sell them a miracle. She showed them the work, the heating, the filtering, the cold start risks, the engines that would fail, the ones that would survive, the crops that could carry enough oil. The math that had to be done before pride turned into wrecked machinery. Rafe built kits. Mara taught the ledger, and across the county, farmers began planting strips of canola and sunflower between corn and wheat. Not because it was fashionable, but because they had seen a widow run a farm on something Ellis Braddock could not buy out from under her. By Christmas, Flintline acres lay under snow. Mara stood on the porch in Jonah's old coat, holding the black notebook against her chest. The fields were silent. The tractors were paid for. The bank had no leash. The fuel co-op had no chokehold. Ellis Braddock was fighting charges while his empire cracked into pieces he could no longer control. The wind moved over the stubble and made the whole farm whisper. Mara looked toward bin 3, where the last of the canola seed had once waited like a forgotten failure. She had thought Jonah left her a farm. Then she had thought he left her a burden. Now she understood what he had really left. A question. What do you do when the whole system is built to make you beg? Mara smiled into the cold. You grow the thing they cannot sell you. Then you burn it clean enough to light the way out.